This tutorial will walk you through how to create a flower using only primitives and deformers.
Before we get started, this is future me interjection to let you know that this is a bit of an older tutorial, so the interface looks slightly different. While all of the tools are the same, I want to show you how to switch to the legacy interface if you feel more comfortable following along when I say go up here to find X, Y, or Z. So when you're in Cinema, go to the three little dots on the right side and select at the bottom Legacy Layouts. Once you click there, you want to go here to Standard and click on that once. And now your cinema will be in a similar layout, just with newer icons. So it's the same layout as the video, but the icons are the current icons. This should make things slightly easier to follow along with this video.
Let's begin by taking out a cylinder and renaming it Pot Base. This will serve as the base of our flower pot. First, I'm using the little cubes, the little orange cubes, to approximate its size. Let's make it bigger in the radius but smaller in the height. Once you approximate it, make sure to round out your numbers. I am writing in 75 centimeters for my radius and 140 centimeters for my height. Try to follow along with me as much as you can. Later on, you will be able to create your own flower. If we take a closer look at this cylinder, it has really sharp edges. This is because it does not have enough rotation segments. So I want to increase that by going to rotation segments and upping that to 36. Now it's much smoother. Let's take out a taper deformer and make it a child of our pot base. Click on Fit to Parent, and I want the top of this cylinder to be twice as big as the bottom. So I'm going to decrease the strength to -50%. For tapers, positive means it's tapering in, meaning it's making the top smaller, and negatives means it's tapering out, so making the top bigger. Now I want to reduce the curvature to 0% because I want a straight edge pot. Alright, looking good. Before we move on, let's add some round edges to the cylinder. Let's go to the attributes and click on the caps menu. We're going to check on fillet. You can automatically see a drastic difference, but I want it a bit more cartoonish, so I'm going to increase the fillet segments and radius. If you change your display to garage shading with lines, you can see how the segments alter the rounding and how the radius increases the rounding. I'm going to leave it at 4 segments and 4 centimeters in the radius. Something I always make sure to do when working with deformers is hide the initially very helpful but quickly very much in your way purple bounding boxes. I only need to hide it in the viewport since the bounding boxes do not show up in the render. So click on the top visibility dot until it turns red, and this will hide it in the viewport. We're going to be using quite a lot of deformers, so it is important that you don't have those bounding boxes obstructing your view. Now let's go back to regular garage shading and make the top part of this pot. Taking out a tube object, I want this tube to be this portion of a terracotta pot. So let's move it up and size it accordingly. We want to make the outer radius bigger than our pot, but the inner radius still fit within our pot. So let's change to top view so that we can better visualize this. Here in top view, you can see the object highlighted orange is my tube, because that's the one that I have selected, and the black lines underneath are the pot base. So like I mentioned, inner radius should be interacting with our base at around 100 centimeters, and outer radius should be bigger at around 120 centimeters. Let's also increase the rotation segments of this tube since it does have far too few and looks jagged. Alright, so of course I want to make this smaller in the height, so I'm going to change the front view and decrease the height. Near 25 centimeters means I am rounding it up to 25 centimeters. And let's place it using our move tool. Looking at it in perspective view, I am noticing 25 centimeters for the height might be too small, so let's increase that to 30 centimeters. And let's bring the tube down a little bit, from 70 centimeters to 65 centimeters in position Y. This is the best part of working with parametric objects. Of course, we also need to add fillet to this tube. Since we did 4 and 4 for the base, let's do the same for this top part. Looking nice! Let's name it Pod Ring. Alright, now let's add some soil. We're going to make soil by using a landscape object. Move it up a bit and changing it to spherical, so that it turns into a ball. Now, switching between pressing T on our keyboard for our scale tool and E for the move tool, let's make this ball smaller and position it near the inside of the pot. If you notice up here in the landscape, you see a weird pinching happening. This is where the landscape is meeting to make the sphere. And I don't want to see this on my soil, so let's rotate it by pressing R on your keyboard and rotate it around the Z-axis by using the blue sphere outline. Now there's no pinching.
Hi there, future me interjected once again. So here I want to fix an issue with the landscape. We're going to be using the FFD to size this down and flatten it. However, if you were to do it the way that I used to do it, which was to take out an FFD, make it a child of the landscape, and hit and fit to parent, you will see that it doesn't fit it to parent at the center of the landscape. So if I were to go now and edit it, only half of it will get edited. So instead of doing that, what we're going to do is take out an FFD, make sure that it is positioned correctly, completely over the landscape before we even make it a child. So I'm going to size it fully over, make sure that it is covering the entire thing, looking at all of the other views. I don't even need to make it smaller, this size will work. And now I can make it a child of my landscape. So when I continue to the next few steps, it will affect everything evenly and not affect only half of it. Okay, let's go back to the tutorial.
And switch into point mode to view the points. I want to flatten out the soil, so I am going to select every single point by doing Ctrl A on my keyboard.
You can also go up to select all.
And now I will switch to my scale tool by pressing T and scale down this FFD in Y. As a reminder, scaling, rotating, and moving happens in relation to where your axis is. If you have more than one object or point selected, the axis positions itself in an average of the object selected. In the case of this FFD, scaling is happening from the exact center because that is the average position of all our points. Now that this soil is flat, I want to make sure that it fits properly inside of the pot and does not overflow or have holes. So I'm going to switch to my life selection, pressing 9 on your keyboard, and move around some of the outside points to affect the shape of this flattened landscape.
To select multiple points at once, simply click and drag over them.
Make sure that you do not have any portion of landscape that is sticking through your pot ring or the base. Once you're done, hide the FFD deformer from the viewport. Okay, so while this looks good, it could look better. And we are going to use a deformer that I did not mention in the presentation called Smoothen. Let's make Smoothen a child of the landscape and look at its attributes. This deformer has a lot of different properties, but the only one that we will alter is the strength, which determines how much the landscape will actually smooth. As you can see, the 100% is a little too strong and we lose too much definition. So let's decrease this to something around 30%. And here I am just activating and deactivating it so that I can see the difference that it makes. Alright, I like this. Let's name our landscape soil. Now let's make the stem. Take out a cylinder object and using your move tool, E on your keyboard, let's move it up to above the pot but interacting with the soil. Let's decrease the radius to 7 centimeters and increase the rotation segments just a little bit so that it's not jagged. Normally, this would have sufficed, but I want to add a bit more life to the stem by getting a bulge deformer. Make the bulge a child of the stem and fit to parent. I am first increasing the strength in the positives just so that I can see the 4 height segments and be able to visualize the smoothness when I increase these. We actually want this bulge to be in the negative strength so that the deformation happens inwards, but it is just easier to see the smoothness when it is bulging out. So let's make the strength negative and let's play around with how we want this to look. After a bit more alteration, the number I decided on was negative 50% in the strength, and I positioned it just a bit higher than the position of the cylinder. Now let's hide the bulge deformer and name the cylinder stem. To make the bud of the flower, we are going to use an oil tank object. Let's move it upwards with our move tool to approximate the position, and I am resetting my view so that you can see that when I change the orientation of my oil tank to +Z, the round part faces forward. Let's increase the rotation segments to smooth it out and press T for your scale tool to scale it down and get an approximate size. The radius looks good at about 40 centimeters, and let's also decrease the height so that we can have the flat part of the oil tank be just slightly bigger than our stem. Imagine a lollipop. 30 centimeters for the height looks good. I chose an oil tank for this flower because the flat radius of it is a perfect place to add petals later on. Regardless, we should still round out the front a little more, as well as maybe push it forward slightly. So let's take out a spherify deformer, make it a child of the oil tank, and fit to parent. I ended up playing around with this longer than I expected, but the point is to get a slight protuberance on the front of the bud. You're going to have to play around with yours as well, but this is the ultimate position I got. Just slightly forward, and the size is just a bit smaller than the object itself. The strength remained at 20%. At the end, if your object looks jagged, remember you can always increase the segments. In the case of an oil tank, the front segments are called cap segments. Just so that you're aware, the shortcuts for switching between garage shading and garage shading lines is NA and NB. NB will give you the lines and NA will take them away. You don't have to remember this, just remember that you can go up to display and change it there. Alright, so let's hide our spherify and rename our oil tank bud. So now we have 5 different objects with children of their own in the object manager. So things are getting a little messy. So let's start organizing things by using a null. You could go up to the object manager and take a null out and click and drag your objects and put them into the null, or you can simply click on the shortcut Alt-G and this will take the objects that you currently have selected and put them into a null. I am naming this null pot because I selected the 3 pieces of the pot: the base, the ring, and the soil. Now we get to the petals. Let's make them out of a capsule object. Take one out and let's, using the move tool, move it upward to approximate where the first petal will be. Like I mentioned, follow along with me as best as you can. Your petals do not have to look exactly like mine, but try to make them look similar. First, let's scale down our capsule by pressing T on our keyboard and clicking and dragging outside so that all sides change at once. Once again, let's change back to our move tool by pressing E and continue positioning our petal. I am rounding out the radius of the capsule to 30 centimeters and the height to 100. Let's increase the rotation segments to 24, as well as the height and cap segments to 8. Look at the difference the segments make. Now let's take out an FFD and make it a child of the capsule. We're going to make the shape of our petal using this FFD. Let's add more grid points, so 5 in X, 5 in Y, and 5 in Z. And let's change to our live selection tool. Quick note, as I was editing this, I realized that there was a mistake in the footage, so I had to re-record this on a different computer, just so you know that the shortcuts will not appear in the bottom, but I will call them out every time that I use them. This is only for the next 2 to 3 minutes of footage. Alright, so now that we have an FFD as a child of the capsule and have more points to work with, I want to point out that FFDs in perspective view allow you to select through your objects, as if you had a laser. So notice how making a selection on these points in the front also selects these points in the back. This is both fantastic and dangerous. Dangerous because we can mistakenly select the wrong points and alter them, but fantastic because it will speed up our workflow. First, let's make this shape resemble a petal more. Try to follow along as best as you can to create a similar petal. Let's do Ctrl A to select all and T to switch to our scale tool. We want to flatten this out in the Z direction. So holding the blue cube, we're going to make this small enough so that it does not cross the edge of our oil tank. This is important because later, when we add more petals, if we are crossing that edge, our petals make a hexagon in the middle when they're together. We want to make it clear that it's a circle. Okay, so now let's take advantage of this laser thing. We can select entire rows if we click and hold our live selection, 9 on your keyboard. To make sure that I'm selecting through, I just swipe through a few times on the same row. Now I am rotating my camera around to make sure that I did indeed select the buttons in the back. Since I did, we're going to start shaping this petal. Since the petals will be facing forward, we want to alter the X direction, which is left and right. So with our selection, let's switch to T for our scale tool and scale this in X. Using a similar technique with the row above, switching to 9 for the live selection, selecting the entire row, double checking, T for scale, scaling in X. Once again. I will not speed through this process so that you can see that it is a manual process and takes a little bit of time. Something that has captured my eye is that this capsule does not have enough segments for how much we're trying to deform it. So let's quickly hide our FFD and click on our capsule to show its attributes. And now let's increase all of our segments, so height, cap, and rotation. Look at how much smoother things are as they get more segments. Back to edit in our FFD. Let's make it visible once again, and let's now edit its depth. We initially made the entire thing very thin to fit into the flat part of our oil tank, but now we can select specific parts and make them more plumb by scaling them in the Z direction. But make sure that you do not cross the oil tank's boundary. Creating this pedal actually requires spending time with it and playing around. Just remember the shortcuts: T for scale, E for move, 9 for live selection. You will be switching back and forth between them. This is not the final form of my pedal, but we need to have more than one to get a better visual reference. So for now, let's hide our FFD and name our capsule pedal. In the presentation, I mentioned Enable Axis, which allows us to alter the axis of an object. We're going to use the null enable axis trick to be able to rotate our pedals easier. First, let's put the pedal capsule as a child of a null. Let's name the null pedal orig for original. I'm going to check on Enable Axis and switch to the 4-panel view so that I can alter the axis from the front view. This makes it easier to see. Notice that the null's axis is all the way down at 000. We want to bring this up to the center of our oil tank. Zoom in so that you can truly see the center. Once you're happy with the position of it, make sure to press Enable Axis once again to disable it, so that now we can go back to our axis moving our object. The reason I did this is that now our pedals rotate around the butt, so whenever we create a new one, we just have to rotate it around in one direction. Otherwise, it would look like this. Let's learn about another new tool. This time it is called the Instance Object Generator. You can find this generator under this menu, and what the instance object does is that it creates an instance of whatever object you have selected, in this case our pedal null. An instance is a clone that does not have its own geometry, which means it is linked to the original object, so whatever changes you make to your original can also happen to your instance. Because it does not have its own geometry, it is also much easier for computers to handle. Notice that the only attribute in the instance object are reference object and instance mode. Reference object is just the object that it is cloning, and you don't have to worry about instance mode at the moment. We'll talk about that later. If you took out an instance and the reference object is empty, you can drag an object from the Objects Manager to that open slot. Normally, if you have something selected in your Objects Manager and you take out an instance, you will create an instance of that. So our instance object comes out with the same name as its reference plus the word instance. Notice the icon in the Objects Manager. Let's press R on our keyboard to use our rotate tool and rotate this object. Look how handy it was that we fixed that axis. So I want 6 petals all around the flower, and I have 360 degrees of rotation to cover. This means we're going to do a little bit of math. Let's divide 360 by 6, which is equal to 60. So every new instance that we create needs to be rotated in increments of 60. However, before we do that, remember how I mentioned that we needed another petal to continue editing our original? Let's fill in this gap here by going to our petal original and make the FFD visible. So now, with our life selection, let's try to close that gap. You can hide the bud in the meantime just so that you can get a better view. Select the points with your life selection, make sure that you're selecting an entire row, and scale them outwards in the X direction until the gap is closed. Now let's bring back our bud. Looking good. Now we can continue adding petals. Make sure you are selecting your original, and let's go find the instance object. Rename it to petal 2. Rotate it in 60-degree increments. So now this third petal should be 120. And do it again. This is the same process all around. After 120, you have 180, 240, and so on and so forth. Before you continue, notice that you can unclip menus by hovering over the top bar and letting go. This will allow you to click instance faster, and then simply you can close the menu when you are done. Alright, I should have done this a while ago, but better late than never. Let's save. Control S to save your file, name, and OK. Let's group together all our petals by selecting them all and pressing Alt-G on your keyboard to put them into a null. Remember, you can also pull out a null from the Objects Manager and drag them in. I am naming this null Petals. Let's now make a copy of our petal original by using Ctrl-C to copy and Ctrl-V to paste. And if it got pasted within the petals null, you want to drag it out of the petals null. We're also going to take the petal outside of our petal original null. Let's delete that empty null and let's rename the petal we took out as leaf. We are going to use the already made base of the petal to create a leaf shape instead of doing it from scratch. With your move tool, let's bring it down and stick it into the soil. Press R to change to the rotate tool and rotate it. Back to E, move tool, to place it. We clearly need to reshape this, so let's make our FFD visible once again. Make sure we're in point mode and Ctrl A to select all points. Let's scale this up in Y to make it longer. And now let's bring out a bend deformer. Make the bend deformer a child of the leaf and fit to parent. Notice how a bend before an FFD breaks your object, so you want to make sure that your bend is the second child of this parent. Increase the bend strength to any random number for now, just to get a visual. And we see that this leaf is a little too chunky. So let's make our FFD visible once again and continue editing those points. Ctrl A to select them all, and I am making it thinner by scaling it down in Z. Now I am selecting specific rows and further editing the leaves to get a nicer shape. Because we're adding even further deformation to this leaf, it is a good idea to increase the segments to get a smooth bend. You can alter the bend to your liking, but I decided to make the mode be unlimited so that the bend strength affected the entire object similarly. Then I reduced the random strength and I made it a value of -73. And lastly, I moved the bend bounding box so that my bend happened from a different point in the capsule. Let's hide both the FFD and the bend from the viewport. And make an instance object of our leaf. Press R to change to the rotate tool and rotate this leaf 180 degrees. Now E to go to the move tool and place it on the other side of our pot. I want to add a little more life to these leaves by making the shape slightly more interesting. Let's duplicate our bend deformer and make it another child of the original leaf. Right away you can see that the second bend makes quite a difference. I actually played around with this a bit because I found it amusing. I think it would make a cool animation. But regardless, what I actually wanted to do was change the angle of this secondary bend so that our leaf leaned back slightly. To do this, I rotated the bounding box of that second bend. You could have also simply changed the angle of the bend. I am decreasing the strength because while I want more life, I don't want it to be too exaggerated. And notice how cool it is that our instance of the leaf is leaning forwards instead of backwards. This is because I rotated it 180 degrees, so it's like a mirror image. Check on keep y-axis length so that our leaf does not stretch out because of the second bend. Look at how subtle but significant that bend is. Now let's name them since we have two. One is our full bend and the second is our back bend. Once again, naming is incredibly important because let's say you had 30 different bends, you need to know which one does what. Let's group together our leaf and our leaf instance into a null and call it leaves. Looking great! We could call it a day here, but no. We're going to continue to add life to this. First, let's add a curvature to the petals. You can do this by going in and adding a bend to the original petal, but instead I am going to use a spherify, which I will bring into the petal's null. This means that it is now pierced with all of the petals but a child of the null, and therefore will affect all of its peers. I am bringing it up until it is 0 in position Y, which makes it center on our null. And now I'm bringing it forward with the move tool so that the petals kind of hug the spherify and curve forward. Once again, make sure that your petals do not go past the boundary of the oil tank. Our second bring to life trick will be making our stem bend. Take out a bend and make it a child of the stem. You can hide your petals and your bud just so that you can concentrate on the stem only. Notice that the bend that happens before the bulge gives you a weird shape, so let's make the bend the second child of the stem. Now let's group our petals null and our bud into one null and name this null flower. This will allow us to move the null and the children of it will follow along. To make moving it easier, let's change where the axis of this flower's null is at. Go to Enable Axis, go to your Move tool and move it forward. Make sure to turn off Enable Axis once you have made your change. Let's move our flower so that it looks like it's attached to the stem. You can also rotate it to fix the aesthetics of it so that the stem is in the middle of two petals. If your stem, like mine, is sticking through your petals, you can always move your flower slightly ahead. And done with the modeling. Let's add some color to this. Create a material by double-clicking on the Materials Manager and changing the color in the Attributes Manager. I am starting with the pot, and I want to add a terracotta-like color. I mistakenly put the material on the pot knoll, which also includes the soil. So I am toggling that knoll open and clicking and dragging the material thumbnail from the pot knoll to the pot ring. And then I am grabbing another material thumbnail and putting it in the pot base. I will continue to mix some materials. And we are done putting materials. However, as I was about to do my final render, I realized that I was not a fan of how the stem looked, so I made some further alterations to it, both in the strength and the position. This is the idea of working in a non-destructive way. You can always go back and make changes. Nothing is permanent. So make sure to render this out and submit both your Cinema 4D file and your render. I'll see you in the next one.